Another video about the fight between dark drive and cheap or belt-driven wheels. I made this to state my opinion and mainly because I do not agree with what famous YouTubers or sim racers are mostly saying. The current idea is that better wheels won't make you faster. The typical argument is that, albeit feeling better, they're not useful to reduce lap time, it is just a feel thing. Some other comment that they might be helpful to catch a slide or to be consistent, but again, it is not about lap time. In all honesty, some defend that better pedal boxes, namely load cell brake pedals, are actually helpful to improve. But this is it. It is not considered to be worth the hassle. They are expensive, most are not very consumer related because they require fiddling a lot. It is just for the feels. Well, I never agreed with this, but I didn't have proof. But a couple of days ago, the new DD Pro arrived, paid with my own money, no sponsors. So I decided to do back-to-back testing and to check data. Some science, finally. While I never won F1 races, I was lucky enough to be able to put a respectable amount of mileage on various types of race cars. So I was puzzled when I figured out that I was not able to drive a GT3 car, for example, on iRacing. Because I drove it in real life and I was not spinning every lap or so. Yeah, maybe you push harder on racing sims because of the lack of possible damage, but still something was not adding up. Maybe it was because of the lack of feedback, maybe a better steering wheel would have helped. So I decided to test cars increasingly more difficult to drive, first with the new DD Pro and then with my old Thrustmaster T500rs. I selected the Mazda MX-5, the Karma GT4, the 911 Cup, the old one, and finally the Radical. Everyone needs his own circuit so that I do not mix reference braking points. Let's start from the results. This is the summary of the 3 best laps of the T500rs compared with the first 3 laps of the DD Pro. I drove with the Thrustmaster after the DD Pro test. Having said this, there is always a positive gap in favor of the better system. The gap increases also with increased car difficulty, so we go from the MX-5 to the Radical. The one I'm mostly surprised with is the difference with the MX-5, as it is the car that I have used the most and where I honestly thought there was going to be no difference. So these are the data from the MX-5. In white, you will always find the Thrustmaster data, and in the color lines are from the DD Pro. This is one lap of Lime Rock, as you can see. And from here, we can see that lap time difference comes pretty much only from this corner, which I think is corner 4, yes, so which is the one uphill, the right-hander on uphill. Where, yeah, I carried much more speed, so 3/10 are pretty much almost here. But from everywhere else, we can see that, if anything, the blue line is a little bit more performing. So the blue line is correct, the actual speed of the car. So we can see I can trail brake a little bit more here in corner number 1. The same goes for corner number 2. Of course, the big gap in corner number 3, and maybe for the last corner. But this doesn't come from a lot of big difference in the steering wheel input, which is this one under here. In fact, for example, for corner number 3, I use pretty much the same steering wheel angle. And this is, again, there are differences. I understand you can say that, but if these were 2 different drivers or 2 different setup configuration, I would say that they would look very similar from the steering wheel point of view. What is very different for me is the way I can go on the braking. For example, even for this one, so the main difference is I was able to brake much less and with a more controlled way. And if you have a look at it, it looks like the Thrustmaster is more like a button, so it is very flat in certain areas. And this is true also for every other braking. So this is the braking for the last corner, which again you can see, let's say, a couple of steps of brakes. And also for corner number 1, again, the red, which is the Thrustmaster, is not my favorite one because the shape is still pretty silly. But you can see that there is the idea of me trying to trail brake and to, I can feather it a little bit more rather than he with the Thrustmaster. You can see the big chunks and steps. And also this was very difficult for me to trail brake with the Thrustmaster. I knew coming from the DD Pro I had to trail brake, but it was very difficult for me to do because I have to do it in position. No? But anyway, so from looking at it, what we can say is that if anything, there is a difference in brake and throttle application, and that it looks from here that I can drive the car in the same way because the steering wheel angle behavior is pretty much the same. So let's say that these 3/10 probably is just for this corner approach, and so the difference is not so big, probably would be smaller if I do 10 laps or so. And also that it comes pretty much only from the brake pedal feeling, nothing else. No, so it's reasonable for me to expect from the MX-5 that the difference comes only from the pedal, from the pedal box. Okay, so this is the data from the 911 on the Nürburgring GP, and here I think we can say that there's the same thing about the braking that we have said from on the MX-5. So, for example, for the braking corner number 1, the shape of the braking pressure, let's say, is much more defined for the DD Pro, so the red one, and this is an actual shape that I like to see. So it is with the peak at the beginning, slowing, going down, and eventually keeping it at the very end for the real tread braking part. While with the Thrustmaster, it is much less defined, let's say, so it is more steppy. You can see there are much more step, and it was much more difficult for me to actually do the shape that I know I wanted to do. But other than that, here we can see there is quite a big difference in the steering wheel angle. So for example, in the mid corner here, I use much less steering angle for the DD Pro. And this, if we zoom back to the whole lap, this is true for pretty much every single corner. So everywhere I can use less steering wheel angle, and sometimes even going faster. And this is very important because it brings performance into the car. And why so? But first of all, you scrub less the front tire, so there is less, let's say, dissipated energy, but this is minor. With the Thrustmaster, I use much more steering wheel angle because I feel like it is much safer. So instead of keeping the car neutral, let's say I'm in steady state in the middle of the corner, instead of keeping the car neutral, I use a little bit more steering angle, so I oversaturate the front tires so that the car goes into understeer, and it is safer, easier for me to understand. And this is because I don't trust myself catching drifts. So if it snap to oversteer, I'm not confident to save it with the Thrustmaster. While with the DD Pro, I can control it, let's say, on the verge of grip. And this is because this is thanks to the DD Pro that it's much more quicker in reacting in forces. So it has a higher slew rate, let's say, so it's able to produce torque much more quicker than the Thrustmaster. And also there is another thing. So here, for example, which is the braking for corner number 7, which is the arena, I'm able to bring much more speed into in the braking phase, and this is because again I can use much more the combined phase. So because I have much more feedback from the steering wheel, because I think it is because it is stronger. Yes, it is faster, so I can do correction, but also being stronger, I can feel subtle differences because my hand has a limited amount of resolution, so I can feel a drop of 10% from 8 Newton meters, but it's much more difficult for me to feel 10% dropping from 2 Newton meters, And so it is much more easy with the stronger steering wheel to ride the friction circle, let's say, so to use the combined phase of both corner entry and corner exit. And this translates into a much more performing lap overall, where I actually use the car in a very different way. This is different from the MX-5, where probably an improved Pedalbox would have closed the gap. Here, the steering wheel part is very important. And so I think from here we can say that it is important to have a fast steering wheel and decently stronger, not much more than 8 Newton meters in my opinion, because most road cars do not do much more than 8 Newton meters anyway. But again, you need a very fast one. I think the Direct Drive has one of are the fastest, so this is why Direct Drive makes you faster, I think, because again you can actually drive the thing. I'll say it here and then we probably say it later, but anyway, so if with the keyboard you're able to replicate my steering wheel angle, my throttle position, my brake pedal position, you're going to do exactly the same lap time. But it is impossible to do it in open loop without 1 million attempts. And during a race, you don't have 1 million attempts. You have maybe 20 laps to do in a row, where you have to be consistent, and also you have to adapt to different conditions and traffic and whatever. So to summarize, why does a better pedal box make you faster? The short answer is that it is easier to have a muscular memory of the force to apply rather than on the position. So it is easier for a human being to repeatedly go back to a certain amount of Newton of force rather than to a certain movement of millimeters. In the same way, it is easier to control a percentage difference in force rather than in position, especially for these very small position changes. Brake pedals, even when soft, do not move so much. So, with a better pedal box, it is much easier to tread brake. A sharper, faster, with less bandwidth force feedback is always better, and it is helpful to go fast. But this is only if the car is fast enough. If the car is lazy, is not very active, and therefore not very snappy, you won't probably be able to exploit any performance difference. This explains why with the MX-5 improved only under braking, and also why some people suggest only to buy pedal boxes. But the system does not drive on its own. You have to drive it. If you drive it exactly the same as the older system, you will go exactly as fast. The better system allows you to have a better feedback for you to work on it. Through this improved feedback system, you can understand more easily what to do to improve your drive. But you have to understand this and drive purposely to achieve this. This is, I think, also why most people say it won't make you faster. The DD Pro might be the best compromise. It is in fact the cheapest consumer-oriented direct drive. It really is plug and play, it is decently fast, and it is in the reasonable range of force. Stronger than this, anyway, will require a much sturdier racing sim rig that seriously not everyone has space for. I know, kid. It is sad that a more expensive system will result in an improved lap time if you are smart enough, as we have already discussed. By exercising really a lot, you can achieve with much more difficulties the same lap time on an entry-level system. To be precise, if you can follow somehow exactly the input I use in one of my laps, you will record exactly the same lap time, even with a keyboard. But you won't be as consistent. It is imperative to win races. Lose 1/10 per lap on a sprint race and you will find 1 second behind at the end of the race. You cannot afford this. Motorsport is expensive, real motorsport is immensely more expensive. Honor to the people that are able to find the money somehow, not by asking them though. My suggestion, if you want to go faster, you better find the money. Work after school, work overtime, try your best. You have to put your effort towards going faster, you need to want to go fast. Find the money and then practice with mindfulness.